The lemon-scented polish was a sharp, clean lie in a house that smelled of old money, secrets, and something metallic that Nia could never quite place. She worked the soft cloth in small, deliberate circles over the mahogany railing of the grand staircase, her reflection a distorted blur in the dark, gleaming wood. The light blue fabric of her uniform felt stiff against her skin, the white apron a starched, unforgiving shield. Every movement was practiced, quiet, designed to make her invisible. In a house like this, invisibility was survival. The silence was the most expensive thing in the mansion. It was a heavy, weighted silence, the kind that swallowed sound. Footsteps were absorbed by priceless Persian rugs. Voices were hushed, conversations happening behind solid oak doors that clicked shut with the finality of a vault. Nia had been working here for 6 months, and in that time, she had learned the geography of that silence. She knew its textures, its temperatures. She knew the cold dread that pooled at the base of the stairs when the owner of the house was home. He was home now. She didn't need to see him to know. The air itself seemed to stand at attention, charged and waiting. She heard the sound first, the whisper of expensive wool, the soft click of a heavy signet ring being set down on a glass tabletop in the adjoining salon. She kept her head down, her focus absolute on the swirl of wood grain beneath her hand. Do not look up. Do not be noticed. Be a ghost in a blue dress. The rent was 3 weeks late, and her mother's new prescription was sitting at the pharmacy, a slip of paper that felt as heavy as a brick in her wallet. This job, with its silent, terrifying employer and its cash-in-hand payments, was the only thing keeping them from drowning. A low murmur of voices drifted from the salon. One was deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth. Mr. Kwan. The other was obsequious, straining to please. Nia had seen the man who belonged to that voice earlier. A slick, nervous man in a suit that was trying too hard. He had brought offerings. That was the only word Nia could think of for the women who had been paraded through the foyer an hour ago. One by one, they had entered, each more stunning than the last. A model with legs that seemed to start at her collarbone. An actress with a smile that had graced a dozen billboards across Seoul. A cellist with elegant, clever hands. Each was a perfect jewel, presented for Mr. Kwan's inspection. And each had been met with the same crushing, indifferent silence. Nia had been clearing away a tea service when the last one, a woman with eyes the color of summer honey, had been dismissed with a flick of his wrist. He hadn't even looked at her. He had been looking at a spreadsheet on his tablet, his expression as flat and unforgiving as a sheet of ice. Now, the nervous man was making his apologies. My deepest apologies, sir. I misunderstood the requirements. I will find someone more suitable. Mr. Kwan's voice was dangerously soft. You will find nothing. You will leave my house. And you will forget this address. There was a scrape of a chair, a hurried retreat. The front door opened and closed. And then, the silence returned, heavier than before. Nia's heart hammered against her ribs. She finished the last few feet of the railing, her muscles tight. Her shift was almost over. Just a few more tasks in the West Wing, the part of the house he rarely used. She could gather her things, slip out the service entrance, and breathe again. The West Wing felt different. Dust motes danced in the long shafts of late afternoon sun slanting through the tall, arched windows. The furniture here was covered in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the dim light. It was a place of memory, of disuse. It was the one place in the mansion where Nia felt she could exhale. Her task was to polish a collection of silver trophies in a glass cabinet. Old equestrian awards, by the look of them. She pulled on a pair of cotton gloves and opened the cabinet. The air inside smelled of tarnish and time. As she worked, a melody surfaced in her mind, unbidden. It was an old song her grandmother used to sing, a low, mournful spiritual about finding your way home. It was a song for weary souls. Without thinking, she began to hum, the sound a quiet vibration in her chest. The mansion was empty, she thought. Mr. Kwan was in his office in the East Wing. The staff followed his patterns. No one ever came here. The hum deepened, and words bloomed from it, soft as a prayer. Her voice, husky and rich, filled the empty space. It wasn't loud, but it was pure, every note resonating with a loneliness she rarely allowed herself to feel. She sang of lost things and the hope of being found, her eyes closed as she polished a silver cup. The song was for her mother, for the mounting bills, for the girl she used to be before life had become a series of desperate calculations. For a moment, she wasn't Nia, the chubby maid in the too-tight uniform. She was just a voice, floating free in a sunbeam. She finished the last note, letting it hang in the air until it dissolved into the quiet. The silence that rushed back in was different. It was not empty. It was watching. From the far end of the long gallery, a figure stood in the shadows, perfectly still. He had been there for the entire song. Jinwoo Kwon had come to this wing seeking solitude, a respite from the cloying sycophants and the endless, ugly business of his empire. He moved through his life surrounded by noise, the pleading, the threatening, the false laughter. He curated silence like a rare commodity. But this was not silence. This was something else entirely. The voice had wrapped around him, a sound so pure and soulful it felt like a physical touch. It was everything his world was not. Honest, vulnerable, beautiful without artifice. It held the kind of pain he understood, the kind that was carried deep in the bones. He did not move. He did not want to startle the source, to break the spell. He only listened as the last note faded. His head of security, Mr. Park, materialized at his elbow, his presence as silent and expected as his own shadow. "Sir," Mr. Park whispered, having seen his boss frozen in place. Jinwoo Kwon did not look at him. His gaze was fixed on the far end of the gallery, where a sliver of blue uniform was visible behind a sheet-draped sofa. "Find her," he said, his voice a low command that held no room for negotiation. "The one who was singing. Find her. Now." Nia wiped a bead of sweat from her temple, her hand trembling slightly. She heard the distinct sound of heavy, polished shoes moving down the marble floor of the gallery. Coming closer. She had been heard. The blood drained from her face, a cold terror seizing her. In this house, being noticed was a mistake you only made once. She shoved the polishing cloth into her apron pocket and stood frozen, waiting for the inevitable. The footsteps stopped just outside the room. A man in a severe black suit, Mr. Park, filled the doorway. His face was an unreadable mask, but his eyes missed nothing. They swept over the room and landed on her. She felt pinned by his gaze, a butterfly on a board. She expected him to tell her to pack her things, that her employment was terminated. She expected anger, a reprimand. She did not expect the words he spoke. "Mr. Kwon will see you now." The walk to the East Wing office was the longest of Nia's life. Mr. Park walked a pace ahead of her, his back a rigid wall of black wool. Her own feet felt clumsy and loud on the polished floors. Her mind raced, replaying the song. How loud had she been? Who had she disturbed? The fear was a living thing in her throat, choking her. This was it. This was how she lost everything. Mr. Kwon's office was less a room and more a territory. It was vast, walled in dark wood and glass, with a view that encompassed the glittering heart of Seoul. The desk was a slab of black marble, vast and empty except for a single laptop and a small, silver-framed photograph that was turned away from view. And behind it he sat, Jinwoo Kwon. He was exactly as she had only ever seen him in glimpses. Immaculate, formidable, still. He wore a dark gray suit that was so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. His black hair was expertly cut, his face carved from hard angles and shadows. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were dark, intelligent, and utterly cold. They assessed her as she stood before his desk, taking in the cheap blue dress, the flushed cheeks, the fear she was trying so hard to hide. She dropped her gaze to the floor, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Sir," she whispered, her voice tight. "I apologize. I didn't realize anyone could hear. It won't happen again." He said nothing for a long moment. The silence stretched, thin and sharp. He leaned forward slightly, his hands steepled on the desk. When he finally spoke, his voice was the same low, resonant tone she'd heard from the hall, but directed at her. It felt like a physical weight. "Sing," he commanded. Nia's head snapped up. She stared at him, confused. Sir? You heard me. His expression didn't change.
Sing.
The song you were singing in the gallery. This was a test. It had to be. A cruel joke. She swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. I can't. That was not a request, he stated, his voice dropping another degree. It was the voice that made men twice his size tremble. Nia's mind went blank with panic. Sing? Here? For him? But the look in his eyes told her that refusal was not an option. To refuse was to challenge him, and she knew, with primal certainty, what happened to people who challenged Jinwoo Quan. Taking a shaky breath, she closed her eyes, trying to find the quiet place inside her where the music lived. She thought of her mother's tired smile, of the eviction notice tucked under her mattress.
She sang.
The first few notes were tremulous, thin with fear. But then the melody took hold. The story in the song was truer than the terror she felt. Her voice steadied, deepened, and filled the cavernous office. She didn't look at him. She stared at a point on the far wall, pouring every ounce of her worry, her exhaustion, and her fragile hope into the sound. When she finished, the silence that followed was different. It was not empty. It was full of what she had just offered. She dared to look at him. He was watching her, his head tilted slightly. The coldness in his eyes was still there, but it was overlaid with something else. Something sharp and focused. An unsettling curiosity. A phone on his desk buzzed, a sharp, intrusive sound. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. The shift in his demeanor was instantaneous. The brief moment of stillness was gone, replaced by the predator she knew him to be. He answered, his voice clipped and speaking in rapid Korean. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was lethal. As he listened, his gaze flickered to the small, silver-framed photograph on his desk. For a fraction of a second, his thumb brushed the edge of the frame. It was an unconscious gesture, one of profound, hidden pain. A crack in the marble facade. He ended the call with a final, sharp word and stood up. There has been an incident, he said, his attention already elsewhere. The Choi family grows bold. He looked at Mr. Park, who nodded grimly. The air crackled with a new, more immediate danger. Men in dark suits moved swiftly and silently through the halls. The mansion, once a place of oppressive quiet, was now humming with controlled chaos. In the confusion, Nia was forgotten. She stood by the desk, her heart pounding for a different reason now. This was her chance. The doors were unguarded. The staff was distracted. She could walk out the service entrance, melt back into the city, and never come back. It was the same thing to do. The smart thing. She took a step toward the door. Then she stopped. She looked back at Mr. Kwan. He was standing by the window, his back to her, a silhouette of immense power and absolute isolation. She saw the tension in the set of his shoulders, the weight he carried. She thought of the way his thumb had brushed that photograph. He was not just a monster. He was a man under siege. And his money was her mother's medicine. His dangerous world was her only lifeline. Making a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation, she turned not to the door, but to the small service cart in the corner of the office. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. She poured a cup of the barley tea that was always kept hot, her movements calm and steady. She walked back to the desk and placed it near his hand. He didn't turn around, but he spoke, his voice low. "You are still here. You looked like you could use it," she said softly. He finally turned, his dark eyes finding hers. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw not just the maid, not just the source of a sound, but the woman who had stayed when she could have run. The woman who had offered a small, human comfort in the middle of a war. He picked up the cup. The warmth seeped into his cold hands. Later that night, the immediate crisis had been managed, but the threat lingered. The house was locked down, armed guards at every entrance. Nia was told she would be staying, that it was not safe for anyone to leave. She was given a small, Spartan room in the staff quarters. Sleep was impossible. Just after midnight, Mr. Park appeared at her door. "He wants to see you." She found Mr. Kwan back in his office, the city lights a river of diamonds behind him. The suit jacket was gone, his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing a complex tattoo of a dragon snaking up his left arm. He looked tired, the hard edges of his controls softened by exhaustion. "I cannot quiet my mind," he said, his voice rough. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sing for me, Nia." He had used her name. He had never used her name before. It sounded different in his mouth. Not an order this time, but something closer to a plea. She sat, her fear warring with a strange, burgeoning sense of purpose. She sang another song, this one softer, a lullaby about stars watching over a troubled world. He didn't work. He just sat and watched her, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he didn't speak. He just stood, walked to the window, and stood so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, something like cedar and rain. Their eyes met in the reflection on the glass. The city glittered below them, indifferent. The silence between them was not empty. It was charged with a tension so thick it was hard to breathe. It was the silence of two people from different worlds, suddenly and irrevocably occupying the same dangerous space. A week passed. A strange rhythm established itself. By day, Nia was a maid polishing and cleaning, a ghost in the machine of the grand house. But at night, she became something else. She would be summoned to his office, and she would sing. The sessions became their secret ritual, a pocket of stillness in a world of violence. He never touched her, rarely spoke of anything personal, but she saw the way the lines of tension around his eyes would smooth out as she sang. She was becoming his antidote. And he, in turn, was becoming a dangerous habit. She found herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice, the way his long fingers moved over a keyboard, the intense focus in his eyes when he was on a call, the rare, unguarded moments when he looked out at the city, a profound loneliness etched on his face. She told herself it was survival instinct, learning the moods of the predator whose den she now shared. She was lying to herself. One afternoon, she was given a new task, to dust his private study, a room adjacent to the main office that was usually kept locked. The air inside was thick with the scent of old paper and leather. As she carefully wiped down a bookshelf, a large, rolled-up document fell to the floor. She bent to pick it up. It was a set of architectural blueprints. Her breath caught in her throat. She recognized the layout instantly. It was the public hospital in her district, the hospital where her mother was a long-term patient in the palliative care ward. Tucked inside the roll were pages of notes, security patrol schedules, camera blind spots, staff shift changes. A cold dread, far worse than anything she had felt before, washed over her. This wasn't a coincidence. He knew. He had known all along. The job, the money, keeping her here, it wasn't just about her voice. It was leverage. Her mother was his hostage, and she hadn't even known it. The kindness, the shared silence, the charged glances, it was all a lie, a carefully constructed cage. That evening, when Mr. Park came to fetch her, she almost refused. The betrayal was a bitter acid in her stomach. But what choice did she have? To anger him now, with what she knew, would be to sign her mother's death warrant. She walked into his office, her face a mask of placid obedience, her heart a block of ice. He knew something was wrong the moment she entered. The air of quiet communion they had built was gone, replaced by a brittle tension. "You are quiet tonight," he observed, his eyes narrowed. Before she could answer, his phone rang. It was Mr. Park, his voice urgent and laced with static.
"Sir."
There was an attempt. On the way home from her mother's hospital visit. "We intercepted. She's safe." But it was close. The hospital visit. He had allowed her to go, a supervised trip she had thought was an act of grace. It was a test. He was using her as bait. Jinwoo Kwon was moving before the call even ended. The cold fury that descended upon him was terrifying to behold. It was a silent, controlled rage that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. He didn't go to her. He went to the man who had been captured. They brought the Choi operative, beaten and bleeding, into the mansion's sterile, white-tiled basement. Nia was brought along, a silent witness.
She didn't know why.
Perhaps to show her the consequences. Quan circled the man tied to a chair. His questions were quiet, precise, and deadly. The man sobbed, pleading for his life, talking about his children. Quan picked up a heavy, wicked-looking knife from a steel table. The intent was unmistakable. He was going to make an example of him. And that's when Nia did the unthinkable. She spoke. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking but clear. Quan froze, turning to look at her as if he'd forgotten she was there. "This does not concern you. A dead man can't talk," she said, the words coming from a cold, pragmatic place inside her she didn't recognize. "His family thinks he's still working. He can report back to them. He can tell them what you want them to hear. Information is more valuable than a corpse." The room went silent. Quan's men stared at her, shocked. Quan himself just watched her, his expression unreadable. He saw the girl who sang lullabies recommending espionage and psychological warfare. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also a core of hard, unbending steel he hadn't noticed before. He saw a survivor. Slowly, he set the knife down. He looked at the captive, then back at Nia. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes. "A very good point," he said softly. She had just crossed a line. And in his world, there was no going back. Later, they were alone again in his office. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a raw, unnerving intimacy. He stood before her, so close she could see the faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow. "You are a complication I did not plan for," he said. It wasn't an apology or a compliment. It was a confession, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. She met his gaze, the fear and betrayal warring with this new, terrifying connection. "I told myself I stay for the money," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "That's not the only reason anymore." The trap was set. Using the turned operative, Quan arranged a meeting with the head of the Choi family, ostensibly to negotiate a truce. The location was a deserted warehouse district by the Han River. Quan's men were in position, a surgical strike planned to decapitate the rival leadership. He insisted Nia come with him. "They targeted you once," he'd stated, his logic cold and absolute. "You are safest where I can see you." It was not a request. But Choi was no fool. He had anticipated a double cross. The warehouse was not the real meeting point. It was the kill zone. The moment they stepped inside, the lights went out and the world exploded in a cacophony of gunfire and shattering glass. Quan reacted instantly, his body a shield as he threw her to the ground behind a stack of shipping crates. Bullets chewed through the metal above their heads. His movements were not panicked. They were a fluid, lethal dance he had clearly practiced 1,000 times. He pressed a small pistol into her hand. "Stay down. Do not move." He moved away from her, a shadow in the strobing muzzle flashes, drawing fire, his own shots precise and economical. But the main assault was a diversion. From the shadows, a figure emerged, moving not toward Quan, but toward her. It was Choi himself, his face a grim mask of triumph. He had known Quan's weakness. He had seen the way the boss protected the maid. He grabbed Nia, yanking her to her feet, a cold steel barrel pressed against her temple. "Quan," he roared, "drop your weapon, or your songbird loses her voice."
Permanently.
Quan froze, his silhouette visible across the warehouse floor.
He slowly lowered his weapon.
Nia's heart hammered against her ribs, but the terror was cold now, sharp as a shard of ice. She would not be a pawn. She would not be the weakness that got him killed. She remembered the blueprints of the hospital, the feeling of being a hostage. She remembered singing for him in the dark, the fragile peace they had found. She would not be the reason it ended. As Choi adjusted his grip, pulling her tighter against him, she didn't scream or struggle. She relaxed her body for a fraction of a second, a dead weight, causing him to stumble to regain his balance. In that instant of instability, she acted. With all her strength, she drove the heel of her free hand straight up, not at his face, but under his nose, striking the sensitive cartilage there. There was a wet, sickening crunch. Choi screamed, a high, strangled sound, his head snapping back as blinding pain and tears flooded his eyes. His grip on her faltered. It was all the opening Quan needed. 1 second of weakness, was an eternity. A single, suppressed shot echoed in the warehouse, and Choi crumpled to the ground, the look of shock permanently etched on his face. The battle was over as quickly as it had begun. Silence descended, thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Kwan's men began to secure the area, their movements swift and professional. But Kwan walked past them all. He walked past the bodies and the debris, his eyes fixed only on her. He stopped in front of her, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for injuries. His hand came up, his thumb gently brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it branded her skin. "My organization is soldiers," he said, his voice low and raw, meant only for her. "It has lieutenants. It has enforcers." He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the cold control, beyond the tactical mind. She saw a man claiming his territory. It has never had a queen. Until now, it was not a proposal. It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact, and coronation in a field of blood. The cost was clear. Her old life, the simple girl worried about rent, was a ghost. She had stepped through a door and burned it down behind her. Her mother would be moved to a private facility, cared for by the best doctors money could buy, safe and secure. But Nia would be his. Not his prisoner, not anymore. His partner. His anchor. His queen. Later, the blood was washed away. The city was quiet, and they stood by the vast, floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office. She wore a simple black dress of soft silk, provided for her, the cheap blue uniform a relic of a former life. She did not look at him, but at the sprawling galaxy of lights that was Seoul. It was no longer just a city. It was a kingdom, and it was hers too now. The thought was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. He came to stand beside her, a solid, immovable presence at her side. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. His claim was already absolute. She had made her choice in that warehouse, not with a song, but with an act of violence. She had saved him, and in doing so, she had bound herself to his world. This was not a fairy tale ending. It was something far more dangerous and far more real. In the dark reflection of the glass, her eyes met his. A silent pact was sealed, a promise made not in words, but in shared survival. It was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of their reign.